All right, hey, next, Shane, I don't want to hold this off any longer here. We got a terrific interview with Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times. Went on a little deep dive here with Dan Mullen and the state of the Gators. Obviously, the hottest topic here in the SEC, will Dan Mullen return? And Matt, not 100% sure, just like the rest of us. So let's kick it over to our interview with Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times. All right, we're pleased to be joined by Matt Baker, and he is a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times. He votes in the AP Top 25 poll and the Heisman Trophy poll. He's a Heisman voter there, and he covers Florida and Florida State, and he's a must-follow at MBakerTBTimes on Twitter. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and you just, over there at the Tampa Bay Times, you just put out an article, very interesting, on the fact that we all know that if Dan Mullen is in fact going to return next season, he's going to have to do it with a reworked staff. How does that kind of play out based on the research that you've done at a lot of big-time programs that have kind of faced similar situations?
Yeah, I was curious, first of all, I don't know that Mullen will be back, right? Like, I don't think anybody has a great idea right now. If I had to guess, I would lean toward no, but I also don't know that it's decided yet either. So I think the next couple of weeks will really certainly have a role in what happens. But I just wanted to look and see if Dan is indeed the coach for the Gators next year. Obviously, he fired defensive coordinator Todd Grantham and his offensive line coach John Hevesy. So there's some sort of a shakeup that would happen, and who knows what else would happen either. So I just wanted to look at some historical comps to see, like, what are the odds it actually works? Because in my head, it seems like most of the time it does. There are some success stories. A lot of Florida fans have pointed to Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, who went through a 4-8 season, fired the defensive coordinator, changed half the staff, and then they came back. They win 10 games and then make the playoffs twice in 3 years. And fully know we'll make it again this year. Michigan this past offseason had a bunch of staff shakeups. They went younger overall on staff. I think just about every position, I think, is under 45 or something like that. And obviously right now as we sit here, they're in the playoff picture. But there's a lot of negatives as well, right? Ron Zoden and Will Muschamp changed coordinators before their last season. Charlie Strong, Tom Herman at Texas made a bunch of shakeups before their last season didn't work. USC changed coordinators going into the final 2 years of Clay Helton. That didn't work. So it looks to me like this is not if the Gators are looking to say, okay, what are the odds Dan Mullen, and if we give him a year 5, what are the odds it works out with this new staff, that whatever it's going to be? I would lean toward it's more likely that it does not work out and to turn around than that it does.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the Gators traveling to Missouri this weekend. That may not even be that big of a topic right now in Gainesville because it's just so Dan Mullen centric in the future there. But of course, if you think to last season, this was the Darth Vader game. There was the brawl last season. And, both coaches are saying the right things this week. Let's hope there's no animosity that bleeds over to this game. But I'm not even talking about the animosity. I'm thinking more of Missouri, being kind of disrespected in that game. Now they're fighting for their bowl lives. If they can beat the Florida Gators, they punch their ticket to the postseason. How dangerous of a matchup do you think this is for the Gators, taking all that into consideration and considering just how they basically no-showed for half the game against Samford?
I think this is a very dangerous matchup. Let's be real. If Florida had trouble beating Samford and they couldn't beat South Carolina, I mean, it's always kind of risky to start looking at transitive property, right? Who did you lose to and who did they beat and all that stuff. But look, Missouri just beat the South Carolina team that stumped the Gators a couple weeks ago. So if you go by that, it certainly is a possibility. Missouri can run the ball pretty decently, and it certainly has here lately. Florida can't stop the run at all. So I think this is a very dangerous matchup for the Gators. I mean, if they struggled in the first half, literally the worst first half defensively in the history of the Gators program, If they did that against Sanford, what are they going to do against Eli Drinkwitz, who I think is a very competent head coach and a good running back there as well. So I look at that and I see trouble, and I certainly see trouble the next week, even if Florida does beat Missouri. I look ahead to the Florida State game and I see all sorts of warning signs going off for the Gators.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest with you, Matt, I've been doing this long enough. None of these coaching firings and hirings, none of it really surprises me anymore. But I'm sitting here scratching my head trying to think of a coach that has taken such a perception hit as Dan Mullen has in the last 12 months, because I considered him one of the best coaches in all of college football. And yet this season, it's far more often seems like he's being outcoached or his team's making so many mistakes. Can you recall a coach that has taken a perception hit this quickly in roughly 12-month span?
Not off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I mean, Ed Orgeron and Gene Chizik had very spectacular falls from higher highs to arguably lower lows or comparable lows. Mm-hmm. But that played out a little bit longer, and there were questions about both of them heading into, and I think a lot of people realized that they kind of caught lightning in a bottle with Cam and then with the Joes at LSU. This is different because Dan had a track record, right? He did a fantastic job at Mississippi State, second winningest coach in the history of that program. No, they did not win championships and all that stuff, but look, you have to look at what he did where he was. And he had one of the most, the best runs in Mississippi State history. Took him to number one in the country, for goodness sakes. So that was a remarkable job, and he earned all the respect that he got from that. And his first two seasons, and 3/4 or 2/3 of his third season in Gainesville, he did well. I mean, look, he went to 2 New Year's Six Bowls and won those in the first 2 years, 21 wins. Then things look like they're going the right way in year 3 as well, until the LSU game. And then it was just one thing after another. Obviously, the on-field stuff was most problematic with literally the worst defense since at least World War II that they had last year, and things not getting much better this year. In some cases, regressing. You look at some of the head-scratching losses, and really just the last couple of weeks. Like you can go through just about all of Mullen's losses at Florida and kind of rationalize it one way or another. Oh, they were close with Alabama both times. And the LSU, they lost on a guy throwing a shoe and a 50-yard field goal. But that's kind of fluky. And the block kick against Kentucky, and they lost to a great Georgia team that's destroying everybody because they collapsed in the last 3 minutes of the first half. And then you get to South Carolina. There's no excuse for that. None. Zero. A first-year coach at a middling SEC East program led by a third-string quarterback. There's no excuse for that. Zero. And then you look at the first half against Sanford, and Dan wanted to kind of tout how the Gators came back from the 42-28 deficit and outscored them 42-10 the rest of the way, and good on them, I guess. But that first half was awful, and there's no excuse for it. Zero. None. And so I'm like you. I've been trying to kind of contextualize this whole thing and how quickly it all fell apart. Like I've been trying to point to a moment or a decision or something like that. But look, a program of Florida's caliber does not get to be this bad based on one thing. It's a confluence of events and decisions, and recruiting and who they made us, who they hired on their staff and kept on their staff, and game day decisions and all that stuff that combine to have them where they are right now, where a coach that, like you said, a lot of people, myself included, consider to be one of the best in the game, is now fighting for his job heading into the final two weeks, if that's even the right way to put it.
Mm-hmm. Beyond the question of whether Dan Mullen, whether he's let go or whether he returns, in my opinion, I'm just curious to know what you think. Considering the struggles of Miami and Florida State in recent seasons, is Dan Mullen's greatest failure the fact that he did not get more momentum in that state? Because I'm sitting here wondering why the Gators just don't dominate, in recruiting and just like I said, I mean, Florida State and Miami are kind of in shambles, whereas he's got I think 3 top 10 finishes on the field at least, and there's just doesn't seem to be any momentum from that.
There's a lot of things that have gone wrong here, and that's one of them. And really, look, if I'm coming up with a list of why Florida's in this situation, recruiting is at or near the top of it. Absolutely, there's no question. I mean, I looked at the Georgia game, to some degree Alabama as well, but Georgia in particular looked like a team with a bunch of 5 stars playing a team with a bunch of 3 and 4 stars. Because lo and behold, that's what it was. And you can kind of look at the way, that Mullen recruited the first couple of years. They weren't terrible, but it wasn't great either. Mm-hmm. You kind of kept looking and waiting for a breakthrough with recruiting. And it didn't come. And it hasn't come. As we sit here today, Florida's got the number 23 class in 2022. 13 commits, 7 of them are 4 stars, 6 are 3 stars. That's behind Florida State. Florida State right now has a 13 class, 2 5 stars, including Travis Hunter, who is the best prospect in the country, or one of them. That I don't understand it. It's not like, Florida. I think Florida fans think that when their new football training center opens here next year, that's going to be a big boost in recruiting. And yeah, I think it might be. But Florida State doesn't have anything like that. Florida State's facilities, by and large, are not as good as what the Gators have. So you can look at Florida's recruiting situation and maybe you blame it on facilities, but that's not stopping Mike Norvell at Florida State. Norvell was behind the 8 ball just in terms of, he was an outsider. He's not from the state of Florida. It's not like he had a ton of contacts. And then early in his tenure, COVID hits. He can't do any obviously recruiting gets shut down. So kind of his plans to go out and see and be seen, that can't happen. It's not like Dan's in that situation. So why is Florida State having a better class right now than the Gators? That to me is one of the most damning indictments here, where, like you said, the state of Florida, I mean, this is probably the worst year the state has had since Miami and Florida State started to become Miami and Florida State. Mm-hmm. And the Gators should have been in position to capitalize on that in recruiting, and they haven't. And that's an indictment on the staff and what they've done, or more accurately, what they have not done.
Do you have any idea who Dan Mullen may be looking at to be his next defensive coordinator, or is that something that he's probably not even pursued too heavily at this point?
I'm sure he has a list. He always does. All coaches do. And I mean, I think he at least had to think about getting rid of Todd Grantham at the end of last year. But look, that's a very good question. And I presume that should be something that the Gators brass thinks about as they figure out whether Dan deserves a 5th year. But he's got to get to the point where he's in position to hire a defensive coordinator, right? And I don't know that he is. You look at what's happened the last couple of weeks. There were rumblings that obviously the program has not clicked at the level it needs to, right? I mean, the expectation is to compete for championships, and he has not done that. I shouldn't say that, because he did get them 6 points away from Bama, but he hasn't clicked at an elite level yet. And some people have been unhappy, certainly with some of the stuff he did on the field and off the field last year. NCAA probation and penalties, that did not help. So there were rumblings that if he lost to LSU, that'd be hard for him to come back from. And he did. Mm-hmm. And then he gets destroyed by Georgia. And I remember thinking, I don't know if he comes back from this. And then he loses at South Carolina by 23. And I remember thinking, I don't know how he comes back from this. And then he gives up 42 points at home to Stanford. And I remember thinking, I don't know how he comes back from this. So that's 4 games in a row that you're like, this is not good. This is not good. This is not good. This is not good. And that's kind of where he is right now. So it's a good question in terms of who might he hire as defensive coordinator. Manny Diaz in the state might be looking for a job here in a couple weeks for all we know. And he worked with Dan at Mississippi State. So there's going to be options available. And I think Florida would be able to get a good one. I mean, I understand the concern some Gator fans have in terms of what great defensive coordinator would want to hitch your wagon to an embattled head coach, but Florida will pay up. These things always work out. They're not going to get somebody, some schmuck off the street. They will get a good coach if that's the way it works out. But that is a very big if right now.
Any idea what Anthony Richardson will do, and if I have no idea if he's a big Dan Mullen fan or not, but Dan Mullen's fate, does that help or hurt the Gators when it comes to retaining Anthony Richardson?
I'm not sure if it helps or hurts. It would depend on who the new coach is. I mean, Anthony's a Gainesville guy. He went to high school in Gainesville. The Gator brand, that school, that means something to him. And I think that's something that probably goes beyond who the head coach is. Mm-hmm. Now, that said, Dan has a track record in producing quarterbacks and developing them into elite guys. We don't have to go through all the lists, the Dax and Alex Smith and Tim Tebow and Kyle Trask to the Heisman ceremony, all that stuff. He's done a fantastic job over his career, and I'm sure Anthony Richardson knows that, and that's the reason why he wanted to come. But I think it would just depend on what happens next if the Gators do go in a different direction. I would expect, again, we're just talking ifs here, but I would expect the Gators' next coach, whenever that happens, to be an offensive guy. I think Florida's learned that after the Will Muschamp debacle. They need offense. That's the way they're going to have to win. So we would see what happens with that. But yeah, Anthony Richardson's fate is one of the many unanswered questions we have right now circling around the Gators, starting with Dan and working all the way down.
All right, Matt, I really appreciate all your time. I just got one quick question for you. I noted you're a Heisman voter there, and I know the rules, you're not allowed to say who you're going to vote for, so I'm not asking you that. But is this the toughest year you can recall trying to figure out who's going to win the Heisman? And is there a candidate or two that you may be leaning towards, or are you still kind of waiting for the full season to play out?
I'm waiting for the full season to play out, and that's not me trying to be political. That's just the God's honest truth. I mean, I vote for I'm a member of the Football Writers Association of America, so they have an All-American team, and there's all sorts of awards. And before I hopped on here, I filled out a couple of ballots for various awards. It makes me sound way more important than I am, but that's what I've been spending some of the afternoon on. And I don't like doing it now because the season's not over. Right. Like, I don't know whether I think in my heart of hearts Kenny Pickett had a better season this year than C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. The season's not over. Let's see what happens here. I don't know whether I think Kenneth Walker deserves to be on the Heisman ballot over Kobe Dean or Jordan Davis or Anderson at Bama. I don't know yet. It hasn't happened. So when I watch the season, I'm always kind of thinking in the back of my head, who am I going to vote for Heisman? Because it's something I take seriously. It's a cool responsibility. I mean, shoot, I got married. It'll be 10 years ago next month, and the groom's cake at my wedding was the Heisman Trophy. It was shaped like the Heisman.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was fantastic. It was chocolate mint. It was delicious. So to have this responsibility is one I take seriously. So as I'm watching the season, I kind of taking mental notes in my head, and then what I'll do is the Monday after the conference championship games, I come up with a short list. Like I tell my boss, don't bug me. This is what I'm doing today. I come up with a short list, 8 to 12, 15 names, depending on the year, and I will go through one by one. And this guy, let's look at the numbers. Let's dive in. How did he do in the big games? How did he do in the blowout? Look at the highlights, all that stuff, to come up with who I think is the top three. And then I'll once the winner is announced on that Saturday night, I'll publish my explainer on TampaBay.com so people can see why. Even if they disagree with me, they can at least understand why I made the decision I made. Because I've made some that people didn't agree with. I mean, in 2015, I had Dalvin Cook number one from Florida State. I watched him, Derrick Henry, and Leonard Fournette all play a very good Gators defense in back-to-back weeks. Of the three, I thought Dalvin Cook was the best. So I'm fine going against the grain, but I just have to. I want to make sure that you understand why I did what I did, even if you disagree.
All right, he's Matt Baker, Tampa Bay Times reporter, and again, his Twitter handle @MBakerTBTimes. Matt, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Sure, thanks for having me.
All right, Shane, so I just want to say thanks again to Matt for joining the show. Really appreciate him giving us all the time he did and giving us some insight into them Florida Gators.